I stood in the middle of my gallery's main hall, the soft amber lights bathing the paintings in a golden glow. The faint scent of fresh lilies floated from the reception desk, mingling with the rich aroma of freshly polished oak floors. Outside, the New York streets buzzed with life, but in here it was my world, my sanctuary. I adjusted the cuff of my silk blouse, letting my fingertips graze the delicate fabric. My reflection in the glass wall looked calm, confident, untouchable. No one could guess the storms I'd weathered to stand here. That's when my phone buzzed. A new email. It was from Rachel Coleman. Yes, that Rachel, the self-proclaimed art critic who, years ago, laughed so hard at my student exhibition that she spilled her drink on the floor. The subject line read, "Private showing? Can't wait." I scrolled down. She and a group of distinguished art enthusiasts would be visiting the gallery tonight, this gallery. My gallery. For a moment, I just stood there, my heartbeat slow and deliberate, as if my body knew exactly how to savor this. They had no idea. Not that I was the owner. Not that every single piece hanging here was mine. Not that the girl they once mocked had built all of this from the ashes of their ridicule. I let the corner of my mouth curve into a smile. "Welcome," I whispered under my breath, "to my kingdom." I can still remember the night it all fell apart. It was my senior year at Parsons School of Design. I had spent months preparing for the student exhibition, a chance for graduates to showcase their work to critics, gallery owners, and collectors. My walls were lined with large, textured canvases in bold colors, pieces that came from somewhere raw inside me. I wore the only decent dress I owned, a navy blue shift I'd found at a thrift store, pressed within an inch of its life. My hands shook as I placed the final painting, a stormy seascape I'd poured my soul into. When the crowd arrived, I could feel eyes scanning the room. At first, there were smiles, nods, a few polite murmurs. Then I saw them, Rachel Coleman, David Miller, and a cluster of students who treated the exhibition like a social game instead of art. Rachel tilted her head at my seascape, squinting as though she was studying it. Then she laughed. Loud. Too loud. "Looks like a toddler went wild with a brush," she said, turning to David. He smirked. "Yeah, or maybe she painted it blindfolded." Their laughter spread, sharp and cruel, and I felt it pierce through me. I tried to stand still, but my throat burned, my palms damp. Someone behind me whispered, "She's never gonna make it." I wanted to defend myself, to tell them the story behind that piece. The storm I'd painted was the night my father left, the waves swallowing the light like grief itself. But the words wouldn't come. When I got home that night, I sat on the edge of my bed staring at my paintbrushes. That's when I saw her gift, my grandmother's old sable brush, wrapped in a faded ribbon. She had given it to me before she passed, telling me, "Your art will speak for you when words fail. Don't let small minds shrink big dreams." I slept maybe 2 hours before deciding. I wouldn't beg for their approval. I wouldn't let their laughter define me. By sunrise, I had packed a duffel bag with clothes, my brushes, and a few canvases. I left my tiny apartment in Queens, took the early train downtown, and started knocking on doors, cafes, small boutiques, anywhere that had wall space. I was done waiting for permission. That night, I painted until my fingers cramped, the old sable brush steady in my hand like an anchor. The first person who gave me a real chance was Margaret Hill, the owner of a tiny art supply shop on Bleecker Street. I had wandered in on a cold March morning, my duffel bag slung over my shoulder, canvases peeking out like they were shy to be seen. Margaret stood behind the counter in a chunky knit sweater, her silver hair twisted into a bun, glasses hanging from a thin chain. She eyed my canvases. "You paint?" she asked. I nodded. "Trying to." "Let me see." It wasn't a request. I hesitated, then unzipped the bag and pulled out a small abstract, jagged strokes of teal and gold. She studied it for a long moment, her expression unreadable. Finally, she said, "You've got something here. Not polished, but alive." Margaret offered me a part-time job stocking shelves and organizing supplies. "You'll get a discount on materials. And if you're serious, I'll hang one of your pieces in the window. No promises it'll sell." That was enough. I spent my days in the shop and my nights painting in a corner of my cramped sublet. I lived on ramen and black coffee, my fingers constantly stained with cobalt blue or burnt sienna. The winters were brutal, some nights. The radiator barely worked, but I kept going. Small wins trickled in. A tourist bought one of my paintings from the shop window for $80. A local cafe asked to hang 3 of my pieces. Then a blogger wrote a feature on hidden gems in New York's art scene, and my name was there, in black and white. But I didn't tell anyone from my old life. Not my classmates, not Rachel, not my family. I posted modest updates on social media, a photo of my sketchbook, a vague shot of my studio, but never the full picture. Margaret became more than an employer, she was a mentor. She taught me the business side of art, framing costs, commission structures, how to negotiate without underselling myself. She also taught me the art of patience. You don't have to shout to be heard, she'd say. Let your work whisper until the right ears lean in. Years passed. I started selling to collectors, then galleries. The big break came when a West Village gallery offered me a solo show. It sold out on opening night. By then, I had saved enough to rent a proper studio, sunlight streaming in through tall windows, walls splattered with paint like an abstract masterpiece of their own. It was mine, every inch of it. Still, I stayed quiet. There was a strange power in being underestimated. Then, one afternoon, a real estate listing popped up, a historic gallery space for sale in Chelsea. It was far out of my budget, but when I stepped inside, something in me said, this is where it happens. I negotiated hard, emptied my savings, and signed the papers. The space became Haven Gallery, my own. I didn't know then that fate was already weaving the moment when they would walk through my doors. The night of the private showing, the gallery was dressed to perfection. Tall glass vases of white orchids stood at each corner, the champagne bar was set, and the lighting was adjusted so every piece glowed like it had its own heartbeat. I wore a deep emerald wrap dress, the kind that draped in all the right places, and a pair of nude heels that made me feel grounded yet elevated, a little trick I'd learned from years of balancing poise with power. The doors opened at 7. Guests drifted in, their voices a low hum beneath the soft jazz playing overhead. I shook hands, exchanged pleasantries, and watched as the names from my past began to appear. First was David Miller, looking older, a little heavier, his hair thinning. He scanned the room like he owned it, until his gaze caught the largest piece on the far wall, a stormy seascape, just like the one he'd mocked years ago. Only now it was 3 times the size, its details sharper, its depth undeniable. Then came Rachel Coleman. Her laugh hadn't changed, sharp, brittle. She clutched a flute of champagne and strolled through the gallery with a critic's detachment until she paused in front of a vibrant abstract. I could see her brow furrow. That's signature, she murmured to the woman beside her. My paintings were everywhere. The collection was curated to tell my story without words, the early struggles, the evolution, the confidence. I'd placed them deliberately, like chapters of a book, ending with the newest piece, a massive canvas in gold and deep crimson titled Haven. I stayed back at first, letting them take it all in. There's a certain satisfaction in silence, in letting the truth sneak up on someone. It was Rachel who broke first. She approached one of my staff and asked, "Is the artist here tonight? I'd love to meet them." "That would be Miss Carter," my assistant replied with a warm smile, glancing toward me. Rachel turned. Her eyes widened, just a fraction, but enough for me to see the recognition hit. "Emily," she said, like she couldn't believe the name fit the woman in front of her. I smiled, slow and steady. "It's been a while, Rachel." David drifted over, his expression somewhere between shock and disbelief. "Wait, all this is yours?" "Every piece," I said. Then I let the real blow land. "And the gallery. I own it." The silence that followed was delicious. You could almost hear the weight of it pressing down. Rachel glanced around as if the walls themselves were confirming my words. David cleared his throat. "Wow, I had no idea you'd made something of myself?" I finished for him, my tone even. "I guess you wouldn't. I learned it's better to let the work speak until the right audience is listening." There was no anger in my voice, only clarity. I didn't need to raise it. The power was in the fact that I didn't. Guests nearby had caught on to the exchange, eyes flicking between us. Rachel tried to recover, forcing a smile. Well, congratulations. This is impressive. Thank you, I said simply. Enjoy the evening. Every piece here has a story. Some of them might even be about you. I turned away then, leaving them standing in the center of the gallery, surrounded by the very art they once ridiculed. And for the first time in years, I felt no trace of the girl who'd stood trembling in front of her paintings, afraid to speak. The evening wound down, guests filtering out with champagne warmth in their cheeks and glossy brochures in their hands. But Rachel and David lingered, orbiting each other like they weren't sure how to approach me again. Finally, Rachel stepped forward, her tone careful. Emily, I've been thinking. I work with a few galleries downtown. We could. I held up a hand, not rudely, but enough to still her words. Rachel, if this is about collaboration, there would have to be conditions. Her eyebrows lifted. Conditions? Yes, I said evenly. Respect. For all artists, not just the ones who fit your idea of genius. Encouragement instead of cheap shots. The ability to see someone's potential before the world does. David chuckled under his breath, but it wasn't a mocking sound this time, more like a nervous tick. That's fair, he admitted. I took a breath, feeling the old anger try to creep in. But I wasn't here to settle scores. I was here to protect the space I'd built. I'm not interested in humiliating anyone, I continued. But if you want to work with me, if you want a place in this gallery, you'll need to sponsor an emerging artist. Someone unknown. Someone who reminds you of the person you used to underestimate. Rachel's lips parted like she wanted to object, but the words didn't come. David just nodded slowly. And one more thing, I added. No ownership stakes. No strings that could turn this place into anything but what it was meant to be, a haven. They exchanged a glance. It wasn't defiance this time. It was recognition. The kind that comes when someone realizes the ground they're standing on isn't theirs anymore. Rachel cleared her throat. All right. If that's what it takes. I smiled, not as a victor, but as a woman setting boundaries she wished she'd learned years ago. Then we'll talk. But you'll find your artists first. And this time, you'll listen to them. The conversation ended there, but the shift in power was undeniable. I no longer needed their validation. They needed mine. As they left, Margaret, my mentor, appeared at my side. She'd been watching from the balcony above. You handled that well, she said, her voice low. Did I? I asked, exhaling slowly. She gave a small smile. Grace and steel. That's how you win without losing yourself. Her words stayed with me long after the gallery emptied and the lights dimmed. I thought about the younger me, clutching my grandmother's sable brush like a lifeline, believing the only way to survive was to disappear. Now, survival wasn't enough. I was building, protecting, and lifting others with me. And if they wanted to be part of that, they would walk through the same doors they once sneered at, but on my terms. 3 months later, I stood in the back of my gallery, watching something I never thought I'd see. Rachel was kneeling beside a young painter, a shy girl named Olivia Brooks, whose work I'd discovered at a weekend art fair. Rachel was helping her adjust a frame, listening as Olivia explained the meaning behind her piece. No smirks, no sideways glances. Just listening. David had taken on a mentorship too, a street artist from the Bronx named Marcus Lee. He'd even stopped wearing the tailored arrogance he used to carry like a second skin. It wasn't an overnight transformation, but it was real. They'd honored my conditions, sponsoring new artists, giving them resources and space, and more importantly, respect. One evening, after the gallery closed, I walked to my office and pulled open the top drawer of my desk. There it was, my grandmother's sable paintbrush, the ribbon now frayed, the wood worn smooth by years of use. I held it in my hands, remembering her words, "Your art will speak for you when words fail." She was right. It had spoken for me in colors, shapes, and textures, telling the story I couldn't force out of my mouth that night years ago. And now it spoke for others too. I set the brush back in its place and glanced out at the main hall. The walls were lined with pieces from artists who once thought they'd never be seen. Their work shimmered under the gallery lights, each canvas holding its own kind of defiance. Margaret walked in, carrying 2 mugs of coffee. She handed me one and followed my gaze. "Not bad for a girl who once painted in a corner of her apartment," she said with a wink. "Not bad at all," I replied. For a moment, I just stood there, breathing it all in. The faint scent of varnish, the quiet hum of the heater, the gold glow against the walls. I thought about the girl I used to be, nervous, underestimated, her voice buried under the sound of other people's laughter. And I thought about the woman I'd become, steady, grounded, and unafraid to take up space. Turning back toward the hall, I whispered to myself, the words tasting like both victory and peace. They mocked my art, now they walk through my gallery, and my walls speak louder than their words ever could.